Three countries, one defense pact, and a whole lot of questions. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey have signed the Makkah Joint Defence Agreement, declaring that an armed attack against one of them will be treated as an attack against all three of these Sunni majority countries. On paper, that sounds like the birth of a new regional security bloc, almost a West Asian version of NATO. But there is one tiny problem. NATO had an enemy. What exactly is this alliance fighting? The agreement expands defense cooperation, including joint defense industry projects and counter-terrorism cooperation. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has also stressed that the pact is based on collective deterrence, reaffirms the right of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, and is not directed against any particular country. And that last part is important, because if this is purely defensive, as Ankara says, then the obvious question is defense against whom? The agreement comes at a time when West Asia is already dealing with Iran, Israel, the United States, the Houthis, and a very nervous Gulf. Saudi Arabia has obvious security concerns, particularly from Iranian missiles, drones, and attacks linked to the wider regional conflict. But Pakistan and Turkey don't exactly share the same threat perception. Turkey is already a NATO member. An attack on Turkey can potentially activate NATO's collective defense mechanism. Pakistan, meanwhile, has a very different security equation, dominated by its tensions with India and serious internal and western border challenges. So these three countries may have three very different answers to the question, who are we defending ourselves from? And that brings us to the first reason this pact may struggle. There isn't a clearly defined common enemy. Look at what happened in 2015. Saudi Arabia assembled a coalition for its military intervention in Yemen, known as Operation Decisive Storm. Several Arab and Muslim majority countries joined. Pakistan and Turkey did not. So if Saudi Arabia and Pakistan already had defense cooperation, why didn't Pakistan jump into the war when Riyadh actually needed military support? Because alliances look very different on paper compared with the moment somebody actually starts shooting. The second problem is money. Pakistan is already presenting this pact as much more than a defense arrangement. There are growing expectations that Saudi Arabia could provide financial assistance, investment, oil on deferred payments, and even greater employment opportunities for Pakistanis in the Gulf. In other words, Pakistan may be looking at the Makkah Pact and seeing not just a security umbrella, but perhaps an economic umbrella too. We've seen this movie before. CPEC was once sold as the game changer that would transform Pakistan's economic destiny. More than a decade later, however, Pakistan still struggles with debt, weak exports, productivity problems, and recurring balance of payment crisis, while continuing to depend on IMF programs and support from friendly countries. So another defense pact cannot magically fix the economy. Missiles don't balance budgets. Alliances don't replace reforms. And flags lit up in red and green don't create foreign exchange. The third problem is whether these countries would actually fight for one another. Take Saudi Arabia. Riyadh spends enormous amounts on defense, but its experience against the Houthis in Yemen showed that buying sophisticated weapons is one thing. Sustaining an actual war is quite another. Saudi Arabia has also repeatedly tried to avoid becoming trapped in a larger regional conflict. Now take Pakistan. Would Pakistan really go to war with Iran if Iran attacked Saudi Arabia? That is highly doubtful. Pakistan has its own complicated relationship with Iran and would have very little incentive to open another front. And would Pakistan join Saudi Arabia in fighting the Houthis? History says don't bet the house on it. In 2015, when Saudi Arabia formed its Yemen coalition, Pakistan refused to participate militarily. Turkey also stayed out. Then there's Turkey. Ankara has a strong defense industry and close defense ties with Pakistan. But Turkey also has its own economic pressures and crucially is already protected by NATO. So the pact creates an interesting situation. One member has money, another has military manpower and strategic location. The third has a sophisticated defense industry and NATO membership. Sounds impressive until you ask who is actually writing the check, who is actually going to fight, and who decides when an attack on one becomes an attack on all. And this is where India enters the picture. New Delhi is watching the agreement carefully. MEA spokesperson Ranveer Jaiswal said India is examining its implications from the perspective of national security as well as regional peace and stability, while making it clear that India will take all necessary measures to safeguard its national interests.
So, let me say that we continue to closely follow developments in the West Asia conflict. As far as this particular agreement is concerned, we are examining its implications both from the perspective of our national security as well as considerations of regional stability, peace and stability. India remains fully committed to meeting or safeguarding its national interests and will take all necessary measures in this regard.
India's concern is particularly relevant because of Pakistan. If Pakistan were to sponsor another major cross border terror attack and India responded militarily against terrorist infrastructure, would Islamabad attempt to invoke the Makkah Pact? That is the grey area. India has consistently maintained that counter-terrorism action taken in self-defense is fundamentally different from aggression against another sovereign state. And New Delhi has become increasingly clear that terrorism cannot be separated from the state structures that enable it. So Saudi Arabia has a choice to make. If this pact is genuinely about regional defense and stability, Riyadh needs to ensure it is not turned into political cover for cross-border terrorism. Because Saudi Arabia also has deep strategic interests in India. Energy, trade, investment, security, and counter-terrorism. And Turkey's support for Pakistan is hardly new. The real question is whether Saudi Arabia wants its own relationship with India dragged into Pakistan's security calculations. Ultimately, the Mecca Pact may strengthen military cooperation. It may produce joint exercises, defense deals, and diplomatic coordination. But a serious military alliance needs more than dramatic signing ceremony. It needs common threat. It needs compatible interests. It also needs money. And most importantly, it needs members who are actually willing to fight when the moment arrives. The 2015 Yemen episode already showed how quickly brotherhood can meet the hard reality of national interest. So for now, this looks less like a new NATO and more like three countries trying to make their individual strategic interests fit inside one shiny new security package. And Pakistan may be hoping that package comes with an economic bailout. But if history is any guide, a new alliance can create leverage. It cannot manufacture prosperity, erase all conflicts, or force countries to fight wars they don't want to fight. This is Shivangi Mukherjee for India Abroad.